This is a marijuana field. These are the products of marijuana plants. These are devices used by marijuana smokers. This is a marijuana cigarette, commonly known as a joint. And this is a country where marijuana use has become so widespread that the word epidemic is being used to describe it. What about marijuana? Is it safe? Does it help a person? Should it be legalized? Or does marijuana smoking amount to taking a high risk?
Yeah, marijuana is safe. Like, everyone says so. Doctors even use it as medicine. And if it's medicine, it can't hurt you, right?
People say all kinds of stuff about marijuana. Like some say it slows down your brain, it messes up your head. Others say it don't do nothing bad. But the thing is that nobody's ever proved nothing.
I think marijuana should definitely be legalized. When people started smoking it in the 60s, I think that many did it for kicks because it was against the law. So if it were made legal, a lot of people would ignore it.
I think people have a right to smoke it if they want to. I mean, even if it's bad, they're only going to hurt themselves. If kids want to take that chance, it's their business, right?
Obviously, there are many attitudes about marijuana, but how many are correct? Are any of the attitudes we just heard sound? Or have people been deceived about marijuana's effects? In 1980, the U.S. government published a report which showed that 68% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 25 had experimented with marijuana, and that 33% had tried harder drugs. Back in 1962, according to the same report, only 4% of this same age group had ever used marijuana, and only 3% had ever tried the hard drugs, such as cocaine and heroin. In those 18 years, drug use grew dramatically. The result? Many young Americans have become drug addicts and now face a life hardly worth living. Some, unfortunately, drug themselves to death. Drugs really are a problem in America. This presentation is about drugs, but not all drugs, just marijuana, our nation's most widely used drug. Today, some 15 million Americans are marijuana users. Many of them became attracted to hard drugs after starting with marijuana. It is our belief that a better understanding of what marijuana actually does to the human body will help to discourage and to reduce all forms of drug abuse. So we intend to discuss recent findings about marijuana and then contrast them with some of the opinions given by young Americans earlier in this presentation. First, let's consider why it is that people smoke pot. Mostly, they do so simply to get high, which is simply another way to say get intoxicated. Getting high, like getting drunk, artificially makes them feel good or helps them to forget some problems for a little while. There's another reason why marijuana use has spread so rapidly. It occurs when a friend says, "Come on, everybody's trying it." Psychologists call this peer pressure. The pressure of friends and classmates, the pressure of not wanting to seem different, or not wanting to be left out of the crowd. But what if marijuana is harmful instead of what many have been told? What if smoking pot damages bodily functions and interferes with normal physical and mental functions? Would that good feeling or that brief escape from reality be worth the risk? If marijuana could be shown to be dangerous, surely most people would find it easy to resist joining the marijuana crowd. In fact, there would be a different crowd, pulling people away from marijuana. Well, the truth is that marijuana is very dangerous. So dangerous, in fact, that many scientists and researchers use the word poison to describe it. But a few may ask, isn't it true that some doctors approve of marijuana and even prescribe it for use as medicine? To answer that question, we have to realize that only a few doctors have ever recommended it medicinally, and only as a last resort for odd diseases, or for gravely ill patients, such as cancer patients. However, there is a substantial body of medical opinion which disagrees even with this type of marijuana use. Meanwhile, the overwhelming majority of worldwide medical authorities, especially those who have spent extensive time and effort studying the effects of marijuana in laboratories, confirm that marijuana use is truly dangerous enough to label it poison. Among these notable authorities are the following men who come from many different research facilities. Dr. Gabriel Nejas is a research professor at Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York City. For 30 years, he has conducted laboratory experiments investigating the effects of all kinds of drug use on bodily functions. Professor W.D.M. Patton is a member of the faculty at Oxford University in England. He's the chairman of the scientific group in charge of the British government's drug research program. He is widely recognized as one of the world's foremost authorities on drugs. Dr. Robert Heath is the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry and Neurology at Tulane University School of Medicine in Louisiana. Dr. Julius Axelrod is a Nobel Prize winner from the National Institute of Mental Health in Washington, D.C. Dr. Nicholas Pace is an assistant professor of clinical medicine at New York University Medical Center. Dr. Alexander Jakubovic teaches at the University of British Columbia in Western Canada. Dr. Harris Rosenkrantz is the director of biochemical pharmacology at EG&G Mason Research Center in Worcester, Massachusetts. Dr. Harold Voth is a staff psychiatrist at the Menninger Foundation in Topeka, Kansas. Dr. Harold Kalansky is an associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. Dr. Reese T. Jones is a professor of psychiatry at the University of California Medical School in San Francisco. The findings of these highly qualified and widely dispersed scientists, as well as those of others far too numerous to mention, have been published in two major sources from which this presentation has been drawn. The first source is the 1974 U.S. Senate hearings entitled Marijuana Hashish Epidemic and Its Impact on United States Security. Our second source is the proceedings of the 1979 Second Annual Conference on Marijuana entitled Marijuana, Biomedical Effects and Social Implications. This conference was co-sponsored by the New York University Postgraduate Medical School and the American Council on Marijuana and Other Psychoactive Drugs. Now that we know who these scientists are and where their findings have been published, let's look at what they have discovered. In doing so, we list their conclusions under 7 major headings, each of which amounts to a significant danger signal for any user or prospective user of marijuana. The first finding we note is the effect of marijuana on body cells. Marijuana, even when used in only moderate amounts, 4 times per week, causes damage to every aspect of the body's cellular structure. A healthy body constantly produces new cells, but the body of a marijuana user gives birth to a sharply reduced number of cells. Marijuana used 3 times per week will result in a 41% drop in the birth of white blood cells, which specialize in fighting infection and in destroying substances foreign to the body, such as cancer cells. Users, therefore, run a much higher risk of contracting various diseases. Next, let's look at marijuana's effect on the brain. When used steadily for many years, marijuana causes structural changes in brain cells and even irreversible brain damage. British professor W.D.M. Patton has demonstrated that rats exposed to marijuana smoke have smaller brains than do unexposed rats. Canadian Dr. Alexander Jakubovic has shown that when the active ingredient in marijuana is given to a rat which is nursing its young, structural changes in the infant rat's brain cells can be detected. What does the presence of damaged brain cells lead to? Well, for one thing, numerous psychiatrists have testified that they have witnessed many highly intelligent young people who had become steady users of pot. While these individuals used pot, and when they decided to stop, they were no longer able to study or concentrate at the levels they had previously been accustomed to enjoy. Many former users of marijuana have had to admit this same effect themselves. Regarding brain damage, it cannot be stressed too strongly that according to these highly competent scientists, many of marijuana's effects on the brain and elsewhere are irreversible. This means that the damage is not repaired when a person stops using marijuana. The third area we examine for marijuana's effects is the human reproductive system. According to numerous authorities, smoking pot does great harm to the reproductive system. Anyone who intends to become a parent should consider this finding very seriously. Smoking pot at least 4 days a week for 6 months causes a dramatic reduction in male hormones and male sperm. Heavier use can cause impotence. Also, regular pot smoking will result in 3 times as many broken chromosomes as are ever found in non-smokers. Broken chromosomes lead to genetic damage and to deformed offspring. The reproductive system of rhesus monkeys closely resembles that of human beings. Experiments have been conducted with female monkeys after they had been subjected to marijuana smoke over a long period of time. Of pregnancies which were later noted in those monkeys, over 40% resulted in either death in the womb, death at early birth, or early infant death. For our 4th area of concern, we look at marijuana's effect on the respiratory system, the lungs and throat. Steady marijuana use for 1 year can produce numerous respiratory diseases, such as sinusitis, pharyngitis, bronchitis, and emphysema. Dr. Harris Rosenkrantz experimented with rats and mice by giving them marijuana smoke at dosage levels that were equivalent in size to what a human who smoked pot would receive. He noted that the rats suffered severe lung irritation and changes in lung cells, which indicated that the lungs were neither functioning at normal capacity nor properly exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide. Other doctors have noted that emphysema, a lung disease usually found only in older persons, can now be detected in young marijuana users. Still more doctors have described damage to the lungs caused by marijuana as precancerous. Recent research confirms that there is another respiratory problem caused by smoking pot. Marijuana tested at the Medical College of Wisconsin contained a common fungus which causes lung diseases and even life-threatening infections. Dr. Stephen Kagan, who conducted this research, said that of all the marijuana he had tested, he could not find any that did not have the fungus on it. He stressed that burning the marijuana when smoking it did not destroy the fungus. Most importantly, he reported that about half of the marijuana users he had studied were already infected by the fungus. We have already seen that marijuana use damages the body's immune system, which fights infection. But marijuana not only harms a person's ability to fight infection, it turns out to be the carrier of the infection. Our next area of concern is that marijuana's dangerous ingredient builds up in the body. Doctors Nahas, Axelrod, and Pace have established that the human body does not readily rid itself of the dangerous ingredient in marijuana, which is called delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. Instead, THC tends to accumulate in the brain, sex glands, and other fatty tissues of the body. These doctors have demonstrated that up to 50% of the THC from one marijuana cigarette is still found in the system 7 days after it was smoked. Then the doctors conducted a very interesting and revealing experiment. They made some THC radioactive, knowing that a radioactive substance is very easy to detect. After giving it to animals, they noted with radioactive detection equipment that the THC was still present in the lungs, brain, liver, and sex glands of the animals 2 full weeks after it was injected. If it is still present in the body of an animal after 2 weeks, it is safe to assume that this dangerous substance remains in the body of a human being also. Dr. Nahas has further demonstrated that after 27 days of daily doses of marijuana, the amount of THC accumulated in the body is 10 times greater than the amount from a single dose taken only once. Our 6th finding has to do with damage to mental functions. Numerous scientists and doctors have demonstrated that regular users of marijuana will exhibit apathy, dullness, and tiredness. They conclude that pot smoking also damages a person's judgment, concentration powers, and memory. Prolonged and intensive smoking of pot will destroy a sense of reality and cause intellectual deterioration, which can be permanent. Dr. Harold Voth of the Menninger Foundation has reported that marijuana use causes a deterioration in personality, loss of will to achieve, social isolation, and hostility to authority, especially to parents. The seventh of our medical and scientific findings involves psychological and physiological tolerance, which leads to the taking of more drugs and then stronger drugs. When discussing drugs, the word tolerance means that a user needs increasing amounts of a drug to obtain the effect he seeks. Psychological tolerance is the type associated with a person's mind. It is reached when a user is no longer satisfied by the high he has obtained, so he seeks greater highs. Physiological tolerance, on the other hand, is associated with a person's body. It is reached when the user's body needs more of the drug to achieve the same high. After a while, the body becomes less able to react to the drug. More drug is needed, and pot smoking isn't enough anymore. In 1979, Dr. Reese T. Jones experimented with 100 human volunteers and proved beyond a doubt that marijuana users quickly develop tolerance, both psychological and physiological. The volunteers also developed dependence, which means that marijuana use became a necessary part of their lives. Such tolerance and dependence naturally led to experimentation with stronger drugs, such as LSD, cocaine, and heroin. Investigations have repeatedly shown that heavy marijuana users often graduate to more dangerous drugs, and that persons who never use marijuana rarely get started on heroin or cocaine, and the broken life of the addiction that follows. Let's summarize the findings we have just presented. There are 7 major conclusions which have been reached by eminently qualified doctors and scientists who investigated all aspects of marijuana's effects. 1. It harms the body's ability to produce cells. 2. It causes brain damage. 3. It damages the reproductive system. 4. It leads to diseases of the throat and lungs. 5. Its dangerous ingredient builds up in the body. 6. It causes impairment of mental functioning. 7. Its use leads to the taking of stronger drugs. Each of these 7 areas of medical findings could be discussed at greater length. What should be obvious to anyone, however, is that the use of the word poison to describe marijuana is perfectly reasonable. How many people who use marijuana would ever have smoked that first joint if they knew what they were about to do to themselves? We don't think that very many would ever have begun using pot if they only knew. With an awareness of the medical and scientific consequences of smoking marijuana, we can now focus attention on the laws which make it illegal to traffic in the substance. There is a great deal of effort being expended in the United States to have these laws repealed. Should they be repealed? Or, looking at this matter from another perspective, should marijuana be legalized? Those who favor repeal, or as they put it, decriminalization, like to convey the impression that marijuana users always smoke their joints in the privacy of their own surroundings and never bother anyone. Why shouldn't they be allowed to do as they please, say opponents of marijuana laws? After all, it's a free country, isn't it? Well, the answer to that is yes, it is a free country. But even in a free country, no one has the right to endanger others. No one has the right, for instance, to race his automobile 100 miles per hour down a residential street. So we see that no one is totally free to do whatever he wants to do, even in a free country. Government's purpose is the protection of life and property. All of us willingly subject ourselves to many laws whose purpose is to guarantee our safety. And a logical extension of the protection of individual life is the protection of the public health. If public health is threatened, government should act. Marijuana is actually a menace to public health in 2 ways. We have already noted that chronic use damages the brain, harms other bodily cells and organs, and adversely affects the reproductive system. Certainly, such damage on a widespread basis is a menace to public health. Just the provable effects that can be expected on the newly born infants of marijuana users makes the point. But there is another area where marijuana use becomes a menace to public health. It is that users become a threat to the lives and well-being of others. The doctors have shown that marijuana's active ingredient tends to build up in the body. Over 50% of the drug from one marijuana cigarette can still be found in the body and still affect the smoker 7 days after he smoked it. It takes a full 30 days for the body to rid itself of all traces of one marijuana cigarette. In fact, a person who smokes only 1 joint per week is never really drug-free. With this in mind, how would you feel boarding an airplane if the mechanic who serviced its engines was a regular pot smoker, or even an occasional user? How would you feel if you knew that the pilot smoked pot? Suppose a doctor who was scheduled to operate on you or on a loved one participated in a pot party over the weekend. What about the school bus driver or the taxi driver? Are his or her reflexes and ability to think quickly affected by smoking pot? Would you knowingly climb aboard that bus or that taxi if you knew that the driver was a marijuana user? How many automobile accidents are caused by marijuana users? No one knows for sure, of course, but a Massachusetts study found that 1 out of every 6 drivers responsible for fatal accidents was stoned on marijuana when the accident occurred. A similar study in California turned up the fact that 1 of every 7 traffic deaths in that state was caused by a stoned driver. A few years ago, a Chicago train wreck killed 11 persons. The train engineer had not used marijuana for over 24 hours, yet the drug was found in his system, and it was widely believed to have caused a problem of depth perception, which led to the accident. University of Pennsylvania psychiatrists Dr. Harold Kolansky and Dr. William Moore studied the problems associated with marijuana for 9 years. They gave their opinion about marijuana laws as follows. We view marijuana to be a public health hazard. We also believe that the government has a role in protecting public health. Therefore, logically, the government should not legalize marijuana and should continue to prevent the importing, manufacturing, advertising, and sale of all marijuana products. One argument often used by marijuana promoters is that smoking pot is no more dangerous than drinking alcoholic beverages. We do not seek to justify the extensive use and abuse of alcohol, which is a problem all by itself, but it is a serious mistake to equate alcohol with marijuana. Among the many reasons why this is so, we list the following. The active ingredient in marijuana builds up in the body. It can be detected and can affect a user weeks later. Alcohol, on the other hand, passes through the body quickly. An occasional drinker is free of alcohol's bad effects in 12 hours. Another important difference between alcohol use and marijuana use is that a marijuana user is still subject to its effects long after the telltale high is over. This means that a person who no longer looks and acts as though he is still high can still suffer reduced reflex action, poor visual perception, and decreased performance capability. A person who might have these same problems because he is drunk clearly shows that he is affected. He staggers or slurs his speech. But a marijuana user who seems to be unaffected, or who might believe himself to be unaffected, could easily be a poor risk as a driver of an automobile. Those who seek to compare alcohol and marijuana should know that harmful and irreversible effects on the brain occur 10 times more quickly to a chronic marijuana user than to a chronic drinker. Finally, to those who argue that marijuana is merely a substitute for alcohol, it must be pointed out that young people today are not substituting one for the other. They are using both and doing even greater harm to themselves, while becoming a more serious menace to society. Clearly, smoking pot is more dangerous than drinking, though both are dangerous. Another consequence of marijuana use is the high percentage of crime, especially among teenagers, which is traceable to drug usage. Examples include thievery to finance drug purchases, violent and disruptive behavior in school, and vandalism while high. When the safety and property of law-abiding citizens are threatened by increases in crime directly connected to drug use, there is no question but that laws against drug use, including marijuana use, are reasonable and proper. If all that has been presented about marijuana is known, how can it be that smoking pot is so widespread here in America? The obvious answer to that question is that the bad effects of marijuana use that we have discussed are not known to most Americans. As we have already stated, if users of marijuana knew what they were doing just to themselves, there would hardly be any users. If the truth about pot were known, the dealers and pushers who make large amounts of money from unsuspecting young Americans would no longer be looked upon as friends, but as deadly enemies who care nothing about the good health of their victims while they fatten their own wallets. Yes, if the truth about marijuana were known, using it would not be considered smart. It would be well known as a high form of stupidity. But the lack of information available to most Americans about marijuana's bad effects is only one of the reasons why its use is so common. Another reason is that there are organizations actually promoting marijuana use and working to destroy laws against marijuana. One such organization is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, called NORML. Founded by a Washington lawyer named Keith Stroop, NORML received significant help at its founding from former Attorney General Ramsey Clark. Financial help came from the Playboy Foundation, with which NORML has had a close relationship from its beginning. In 1978, President Carter's chief advisor on drug use, Dr. Peter Bourne, delivered the keynote address at the NORML annual convention. This is probably the high point of federal assistance for spreading marijuana throughout the nation. Dr. Bourne was himself a marijuana user, and when he was eventually forced to resign because of his illegal activity involving other drugs, he let it be known that there was a high incidence of marijuana use and even cocaine use among White House personnel. The use of dangerous drugs had spread even to the topmost seat of our national government during the administration of former President Carter. NORML produces and sells marijuana gimmicks such as buttons, stickers, T-shirts, and other paraphernalia. The group's leaflet, Marijuana, The Facts, falsely claims that no conclusive evidence exists of any physical damage, disturbances of bodily processes, or proven fatalities attributable solely to even high doses of marijuana. That statement is totally false, as the scientists and doctors named earlier in this presentation have shown. But unfortunately, a great many Americans believe these dangerous lies. They are certainly encouraged to do so by the swarms of marijuana pushers who roam through this nation seeking more young customers and more filthy money. Another organization which is working to break down opposition to marijuana is the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. This group offers legal help to anyone who will challenge existing marijuana laws. In this ACLU book, students are urged to fight for the right to destroy their own bodies by using marijuana. And the ACLU consistently takes the side of those individuals who sell all kinds of drug-related equipment, such as needles, spoons, pipes, rolling paper, and so on. A few years ago, Keith Stroop of NORML and other marijuana promoters announced plans to work for legalization of cocaine, too. In 1977, preparations were laid to form a separate organization called NORCL, the National Organization for the Reform of Cocaine Laws. All that needs to be said about such a plan is that where marijuana clearly damages the health of human beings, cocaine destroys it completely. Anyone promoting cocaine use is either crazy or downright evil. Perhaps the greatest of all of the inducements to young people comes from rock music and rock music stars. One after another popular song and album encourages drug use, especially marijuana use. Rock concerts are in many ways the equivalent of a drug supermarket. And young people flock to these concerts where they pour millions of dollars into the pockets of drug-promoting musicians and their agents. Not all musicians favored by the young promote drugs, but most do. And the fact that they do is no secret to anyone. Not only are American teenagers being encouraged to become part of the drug scene via the music they listen to, they are even paying for the dubious privilege of being introduced to dangerous drugs. Heavy pressure and lack of good information has already led several states to consider decriminalization of marijuana. In other states, existing laws against pot are not being enforced. Some individuals have claimed that removal of legal sanctions and ready availability of marijuana would take away the air of mystery and adventure from the substance, thereby removing its popularity. But experience proves otherwise. When drugs are readily available, drug use increases. Conversely, in countries where drug problems are not widespread, as in South Korea, Taiwan, and Italy, strong laws have helped to keep the problem in check. Anyone studying the pros and cons of these laws should become acquainted with the effects of a permissive attitude towards marijuana in the ancient cultures of Turkey, Morocco, India, Iran, and Egypt. Centuries ago, marijuana use in these nations led to severe moral, social, and economic decay. The stupefying effects of marijuana kept the poor impoverished and made the entire population submissive to control. Marijuana use is now strongly prohibited in these nations, but it has taken centuries for its profound effects to be only partially overcome. In our own day, we see that ready availability of drugs leads to wider drug use among our own servicemen. In West Germany, where drug laws are more lax and even ignored by the government, marijuana use among American military personnel is high. But in Italy, where drug laws are more severely enforced, marijuana use among the Americans is significantly lower. And the Americans who are stationed in these two countries are basically the same. The difference in the amount of their drug usage is traceable to the way the laws are enforced. Over 2 centuries ago, America won her freedom from tyranny because of the exhaustive efforts of dedicated patriots who fought a just cause with clear minds and strong bodies. In the succeeding years, several generations of our people have remained spiritually and physically strong enough to guard that hard-earned liberty and to pass it on to each new generation. If our nation's marijuana epidemic is not erased, history assures us that America will either decay from within or find itself conquered from without. We hope that everyone who sees this film will join in the campaign to spread the truth about marijuana. Help to get this film shown to schools, clubs, church groups, and gatherings in private homes. Read and distribute good literature on this subject, such as the text of this program. Show this film to your elected officials and demand strict enforcement of laws against marijuana. Also make sure that the drive for decriminalization and legalization is exposed for the danger that it poses. Finally, we hope that all who now know something of the truth about marijuana will stay away from it and get others to do the same. But don't stay away from marijuana just because there are laws against it. Realize that the substance really is a poison, which will harm anyone who uses it, and harm the nation as well. Only then will you understand why groups, publications, and individuals who promote marijuana should be classified as purveyors of poison.
Okay, you win. If they legalize marijuana, they might as well legalize cyanide. They're both poisons.
People swear that there's no proof that marijuana is bad. They're nuts. They must be smoking it themselves.
No way, man. What marijuana does to you is something I don't need. I ain't smoking nothing.
Be smart. Don't let them poison either you or your nation.